I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would be whispered about at her own son's wedding. I always imagined I'd be the proud mother, sitting in the front row, dabbing my eyes with a handkerchief as my only child started his new life. But life, as I've learned, has a way of twisting even the simplest dreams into something unrecognizable. My name is Margaret, though most people just call me Maggie. I'm 62, a widow, and until recently, I thought I understood my place in the world. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before dawn, nerves fluttering in my stomach like moths. I'd spent weeks searching for the right dress, something elegant but understated, a deep emerald green that brought out the color in my eyes. I'd even splurged on a new pair of shoes, low-heeled but stylish, and had my hair done at the best salon in town. I wanted to look my best for my son, Daniel. He'd always been my pride, my reason for pushing through the hard years after his father died. I raised him alone, working 2 jobs, pinching pennies, and sacrificing every comfort so he could have the life I never did. The church was already buzzing when I arrived, sunlight streaming through the stained glass, painting the pews in jewel tones. I took my seat near the front, heart swelling with a bittersweet mix of joy and loss. Daniel looked so handsome in his tailored suit, his face alight with happiness as he waited for his bride. I'd only met Olivia, his fiancée, a handful of times. She was beautiful, poised, and came from a family that seemed to have everything: money, connections, a sprawling estate on the edge of town. Her parents, the Whitmores, were the kind of people who made you feel small just by standing next to them. The ceremony was flawless, every detail meticulously planned. Olivia glided down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like moonlight, her father beaming at her side. I watched Daniel's face as he saw her, and for a moment all my worries faded. He was in love, and that was all that mattered, or so I told myself. After the vows, the guests spilled out onto the church steps, laughter and congratulations filling the air. I stood to the side, watching as Daniel and Olivia posed for photos, surrounded by friends and family. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see Olivia's mother, Patricia, her lips pressed into a thin, polite smile. "Maggie, dear, the reception is about to begin. The cars are waiting out front. I trust you'll be able to find your way to the estate?" There was something in her tone, an edge, a subtle reminder that I was a guest in their world, not a member. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. Thank you, Patricia." The Whitmore estate was even more impressive than I remembered. Acres of manicured lawns, fountains, and rose gardens stretched as far as the eye could see. The reception was held in a grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across the marble floors. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between tables, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I found my seat at a table near the back, next to a group of distant relatives and business associates I barely knew. As the evening wore on, I tried to blend in, making polite conversation and sipping my wine. I watched Daniel and Olivia dance their first dance, their faces glowing with the promise of a future I hoped would be kinder than my own. But beneath the surface, I felt the old ache of being out of place, of not quite belonging. It was during dinner that everything changed. The room was buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses when Olivia approached my table, her face flushed with excitement, or maybe champagne. She leaned in, her voice low but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Margaret, I hope you're enjoying yourself. I know these events can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to them." I smiled, trying to keep my tone light. "It's a beautiful evening, Olivia. You and Daniel make a lovely couple." She glanced at my plate, her eyes lingering on the slice of wedding cake I'd barely touched. "You know, my father always says you can tell a lot about a person by how they take care of themselves. Maybe you should try the salad instead. It's lighter. Just a suggestion." A few people at the table tittered and I felt my cheeks burn. I set my fork down, willing myself not to react. But Olivia wasn't finished. Actually, I was just telling Daniel how important it is for family to set a good example. Especially when it comes to health. We wouldn't want anyone to think the Whitmores are, well, letting themselves go. The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. I looked at her, searching for some sign of kindness, but found only cold calculation. I realized then that this was no accident. She wanted to put me in my place, to remind everyone that I was not one of them. Before I could respond, Olivia's father, Richard Whitmore, approached the table. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. He glanced at his daughter, then at me, his eyes narrowing as if trying to place a face he couldn't quite remember. "Olivia, darling, are you introducing me to your new mother-in-law?" he asked, his tone warm but distant. Olivia smiled sweetly. "Of course, Daddy, this is Margaret. She's Daniel's mother." Richard extended his hand, and I shook it, feeling the weight of his gaze. For a moment, I thought he might say something kind, something to smooth over his daughter's cruelty. But instead, he simply nodded and turned away, already scanning the room for someone more important. I sat in silence, the laughter and music swirling around me like a storm. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows and escape the humiliation, but I stayed, holding my head high, refusing to let them see how much it hurt. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of speeches, toasts, and forced smiles. I tried to focus on Daniel, on the happiness in his eyes, but Olivia's words echoed in my mind, each repetition a fresh sting. I could feel the glances from other guests, the way their eyes flicked over me, measuring, judging. I wondered if they saw me as Olivia did, a fat pig, an embarrassment, a woman who didn't belong in their world of privilege and polish. I excused myself after dinner, stepping out onto the terrace to catch my breath. The night air was cool, scented with roses and freshly cut grass. I leaned against the balustrade, staring out at the moonlit gardens, willing myself not to cry. I thought of Daniel as a little boy, his hand in mine as we walked to the park, his laughter bright and unburdened. I wondered if he'd heard what Olivia said, if he'd noticed the way her family treated me. I hoped not. I wanted his day to be perfect, unmarred by the pettiness of others. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "Are you all right, Mrs. Evans?" I turned to see a young woman, one of the servers, her eyes kind and concerned. I managed a smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Just needed a bit of fresh air." She nodded, hesitating as if she wanted to say more, then slipped back inside, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stayed on the terrace for a while, letting the coolness soothe my burning cheeks. When I finally returned to the ballroom, the party was in full swing. The band played a lively tune, and guests crowded the dance floor, their laughter rising above the music. I made my way to the bar, hoping a glass of water would steady my nerves. As I waited, I overheard a group of men nearby, their voices low but animated. "Did you see the way Olivia's father looked at her mother during the toast?" "I'd kill for a marriage like that," one said. Another laughed. "You'd have to be a millionaire first. The Whitmores don't marry for love. They marry for legacy." The words stung, a reminder of the gulf between their world and mine. I took my water and retreated to a quiet corner, watching as Daniel and Olivia made their rounds, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. I wondered if Daniel saw the cracks beneath the surface. The way Olivia's smile never quite reached her eyes. The way her parents seemed more interested in appearances than in genuine connection. It was then that the evening took an unexpected turn. The band paused, and the MC announced that it was time for the father-daughter dance. Olivia and Richard took to the floor, the spotlight illuminating them as they moved in perfect sync. The guests watched, enraptured, as father and daughter glided across the marble, their movements graceful and practiced. As the song ended, Richard led Olivia back to her seat, then turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this special day. It's not every day a man gets to see his daughter marry the love of her life. I'm grateful to welcome Daniel into our family, and I look forward to many happy years together." There was a smattering of applause, and Richard raised his glass in a toast. To family, to love, and to new beginnings. As the guests echoed his words, I caught a glimpse of Richard scanning the room, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than before. There was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, a question unspoken. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I danced with Daniel, holding him close as the music swelled around us. "I love you, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." I smiled, blinking back tears. "I love you too, sweetheart. Always." As the party wound down, I gathered my things and prepared to leave. I was halfway to the door when I heard my name. Margaret! I turned to see Richard striding toward me, his expression unreadable. May I have a word? I hesitated, then nodded, following him into a small sitting room off the main hall. He closed the door behind us, his posture stiff. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice low. Olivia can be thoughtless. She gets it from her mother, I'm afraid. I hope you won't hold her words against her. I studied him, searching for sincerity. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. He nodded, then hesitated, as if weighing his next words. You seem familiar to me. Have we met before? I shook my head. I don't think so. He frowned, his brow furrowing. Strange. I could swear I've seen you somewhere, perhaps in a business setting. I smiled politely. I doubt it. I've been retired for a few years now. He nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. Well, in any case, I hope you enjoyed the evening. I did. Thank you. As I left the estate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Richard's apology was unexpected, but it did little to erase the sting of Olivia's words. Still, I resolved not to let their cruelty define me. I had survived worse. I would survive this too. The days after the wedding were a strange mix of relief and lingering humiliation. I returned to my small but cozy home, grateful for the quiet, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the scent of lavender from the garden. I tried to focus on my routines, watering the plants, reading the morning paper, calling my sister in the evenings. But Olivia's words haunted me, replaying in my mind at odd moments. I wondered if Daniel noticed the tension, if he sensed the undercurrents that had run through his wedding day. He called me once, a few days after the celebration, his voice bright but hurried. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. How are you feeling? I'm fine, Daniel. Just tired, that's all. It was a beautiful wedding. He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he might bring up Olivia or the way her family had treated me. But he didn't. I'm glad you were there. Olivia and I are heading to the Bahamas for our honeymoon. I'll call you when we get back, okay? Of course, sweetheart. Have a wonderful time. I hung up, feeling both proud and strangely alone. I wanted to believe that Daniel was happy, that he'd found the love and security I'd always wished for him. But a part of me worried. I'd seen the way Olivia looked at him, the way she seemed to measure his worth by the standards of her own family. I hoped he was strong enough to hold on to himself, to remember where he came from. A week passed, then 2. I busied myself with volunteer work at the local library, helping children pick out books and reading stories to the little ones. It was a small joy, a reminder that kindness could still be found in the world. But the memory of that night at the Whitmore estate lingered, a bruise that refused to fade. One afternoon, as I was shelving books, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Mrs. Evans? This is Richard Whitmore. I froze, surprised. Oh, hello, Mr. Whitmore. Is everything all right? He cleared his throat. I was hoping we could meet for coffee. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. I hesitated, curiosity warring with caution. Of course. When and where? He suggested a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place where business deals were made over lattes and scones. I agreed, and we set a time for the following morning. That night, I barely slept. I wondered what Richard could possibly want. Was this about Olivia? About Daniel? Or was it something else entirely? I tried to calm my nerves, telling myself that whatever it was, I could handle it. I had faced worse storms. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy blouse and slacks, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I arrived at the cafe early, my hands trembling slightly as I ordered a cup of tea. Richard arrived a few minutes later, looking every bit the successful businessman, confident, composed, but with a hint of unease in his eyes. Thank you for meeting me. Margaret, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Of course. What's this about? He took a deep breath, then leaned in, lowering his voice. I've been thinking about our conversation at the wedding, about how familiar you seemed. I did some digging, and I realized where I'd seen you before. I stiffened, unsure where this was going. You were at the acquisition meeting for Whitmore Industries 3 years ago. The day the company changed hands, you were there, sitting quietly at the end of the table. I remember because you barely spoke, But when you did, everyone listened. I felt my heart race. I had hoped my role in that deal would remain anonymous, hidden behind lawyers and shell companies. But Richard had a sharp memory. I was there as an advisor, I said carefully. I didn't think anyone would remember me. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You weren't just an advisor, were you? You were the one who orchestrated the buyout, the one who saved my company from bankruptcy. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. Richard leaned back, studying me. Why didn't you say anything at the wedding? Why let Olivia treat you that way? I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Because it wasn't the time or place. And because I've learned that some battles aren't worth fighting in public. He nodded, a grudging respect in his eyes. You're a remarkable woman, Margaret. I owe you more than I can ever repay. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything. I did what I thought was right. That's all. He hesitated, then reached into his briefcase, pulling out a folder. There's something else. I've been reviewing the company's financials, and I noticed some irregularities. I think someone's been siphoning funds, someone close to Olivia. I frowned, surprised. What do you mean? He slid the folder across the table. Take a look. I trust your judgment. I opened the folder, scanning the documents. The numbers didn't lie. There were large, unexplained withdrawals, shell accounts, and payments to companies that didn't exist. My stomach twisted as I realized the implications. Do you think Olivia knows? I asked quietly. Richard's face was grim. I don't know, but I need your help to find out. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of purpose. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like I could do something that mattered. I left the cafe with Richard's folder tucked under my arm, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. The walk home felt longer than usual, every step echoing with the weight of what I'd just learned. I thought about Daniel, about the life he was building with Olivia, and a cold dread settled in my chest. If what Richard suspected was true, it wasn't just his company at risk, it was my son's future too. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the documents spread out before me. Years of managing my own modest finances had made me careful, methodical, and I approached Richard's numbers with the same diligence. The pattern was clear. Money was being funneled out of Whitmore Industries through a series of shell companies, each one more cleverly disguised than the last. The amounts weren't small either. Hundreds of thousands, sometimes more, vanishing into accounts with no clear owner. I made notes, cross-referenced dates, and by midnight, I had a list of transactions that pointed to one person, Olivia's older brother, Charles. He'd always been the golden child, the one groomed to take over the family business. But he'd also been reckless, with a taste for expensive cars and riskier investments. I remembered the stories I'd heard at the wedding, whispered behind manicured hands, Charles's failed startups, his gambling debts, the quiet way the family covered up his mistakes. I called Richard the next morning, my voice steady despite the anxiety churning inside me. It's Charles, I said simply. He's been siphoning money for at least 2 years. If you act quickly, you can stop him before he does any more damage. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Thank you, Margaret. I knew I could trust you. After we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the phone. I wondered what would happen next, if Richard would confront his son, if the family would close ranks, if Daniel would ever know the truth. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from the ugliness that lurked beneath the surface of Olivia's perfect world. But I also knew that some lessons had to be learned the hard way. A week passed. I heard nothing from Richard, nothing from Daniel. I tried to lose myself in my routines, but the tension was always there, a low hum beneath the surface. Then, one afternoon, Daniel showed up at my door, his face drawn and pale. Mom, can I come in? Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? He sat at the kitchen table, his hands trembling. Something's happened. Olivia's family? There's been some kind of scandal. The police are involved. Her brother's been arrested for embezzlement. I sat down across from him, my heart aching. I'm so sorry, Daniel. He shook his head, tears shining in his eyes. I don't understand any of it. Olivia's been crying for days. Her parents are furious. And now she's blaming me. She says if I'd been more ambitious, if I'd tried harder to fit in, none of this would have happened. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. Daniel, listen to me. None of this is your fault. You are a good man. You always have been. He looked at me, his expression raw. I just wanted to make her happy. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I tried to be the man she wanted, maybe I'd finally belong. I squeezed his hand, my voice gentle but firm. You don't have to change for anyone, Daniel. The right people will love you for who you are, not for what you can give them. He nodded, wiping his eyes. Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. I wanted to tell him about my meeting with Richard, about the role I'd played in uncovering the truth. But I held back. Some things, I decided, were better left unsaid. The days that followed were a blur of headlines and rumors. The Whitmore name was splashed across the news, their perfect image shattered by scandal. Olivia retreated into herself, barely speaking to Daniel, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. I watched from a distance, offering support when I could, but always careful not to overstep. One evening, Daniel called me, his voice heavy with resignation. Mom, I think my marriage is over. Olivia. She's not the person I thought she was. She cares more about appearances than about us. I can't live like this. My heart broke for him, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. You deserve to be happy, Daniel. Don't ever forget that. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I love you, Mom. Thank you for always being there. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, the house silent around me. I thought about everything that had happened, the wedding, the humiliation, the secrets and lies. I realized that, in the end, it wasn't the Whitmore's wealth or status that mattered. It was the strength to stand up for myself, to protect my son, to hold on to my dignity in the face of cruelty. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the stars blink in the night sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The weeks that followed were a time of quiet reckoning. The Whitmore scandal dominated the local news, and the once invincible family withdrew from public life, their estate now guarded by high hedges and closed gates. I heard whispers at the market, at the library, even at church. Everyone had an opinion, and most were not kind. I kept my head down, refusing to indulge in gossip, but inside I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. I had never wished harm on Olivia or her family, but I couldn't deny the relief that came with the truth finally surfacing. Daniel moved back into his old room for a while, the house suddenly feeling both full and empty at the same time. He was quieter than I remembered, more thoughtful, as if the events of the past months had aged him in ways I couldn't see. We spent our evenings together, sharing simple meals and long walks through the neighborhood. Sometimes we talked about the future, about what he might do next. Other times, we sat in comfortable silence, the bond between us stronger than ever. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, Daniel turned to me, his expression serious. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, darling. Anything. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Did you know? About the Whitmores, I mean. About what was happening with the company? I looked at him, weighing my answer. I thought about the folder Richard had given me, about the hours I'd spent poring over numbers, about the decision to keep my involvement a secret. I wanted to protect Daniel, to spare him the pain of knowing just how deep the deception ran. But I also knew that honesty was the only way forward. I suspected something was wrong, I said quietly. Richard came to me for help. I looked at the numbers, and I realized what Charles was doing. I told Richard what I found, but I didn't want to get you involved. I wanted to protect you. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Thank you, Mom. I know you were just trying to help. I guess I just wish things had turned out differently. So do I admitted. But sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set us free. He reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm glad I have you. As the days passed, Daniel began to rebuild his life. He found a new job at a local tech firm, one that valued his skills and work ethic. He started going out with friends again, laughing more, the shadows in his eyes slowly fading. I watched him with pride, grateful that he was finding his way back to himself. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed to vanish from our lives. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to the city, taking a job at a boutique marketing agency. There were rumors of a new boyfriend, of parties and late nights, but I paid them no mind. She was no longer my concern. One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a note from Richard Whitmore. Dear Margaret, I wanted to thank you again for your help. Without your keen eye and steady hand, I might have lost everything. The company is in the process of restructuring, and I've stepped down as CEO. It's time for a new chapter, for all of us. I hope you and Daniel are well. If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. With gratitude, Richard, I folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer, unsure how to feel. Part of me was glad to have helped, to have made a difference. But another part mourned the loss of what could have been, a family united, a future unmarred by betrayal. As summer turned to autumn, I found myself reflecting on the journey I'd taken. I thought about the humiliation I'd endured at the wedding, the sting of Olivia's words, the way her family had looked down on me. I realized that, in the end, their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was the love I shared with my son, the strength I'd found within myself, and the knowledge that I had done the right thing, even when it was hard. One evening, Daniel came home with a bouquet of wildflowers, his eyes bright with excitement. I met someone, he said, a shy smile on his lips. Her name is Grace. She's kind, funny, and she makes me feel like I can be myself. I hugged him, my heart full. I'm so happy for you, Daniel. You deserve all the happiness in the world. As I watched him walk away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past was behind us, the future wide open. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that we would face them together, stronger than ever. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey I'd taken. From humiliation to vindication, from pain to healing, I realized that true strength isn't about wealth or status or the approval of others. It's about standing tall in the face of adversity, about holding on to your dignity when others try to tear you down. It's about loving fiercely, forgiving freely, and never losing sight of who you are. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that, no matter what the future held, I would always be enough. The first frost of winter arrived quietly, dusting the rooftops and gardens with a silvery sheen. I woke early that morning, wrapped myself in a thick sweater, and stepped outside to breathe in the crisp air. The world felt new, as if the cold had swept away the last remnants of the past year's pain. I stood in my small garden, watching the sun rise over the fence, and felt a sense of gratitude settle in my bones. Life, I realized, was not about the grand moments or the approval of those who never truly saw me. It was about the quiet victories, the small acts of courage, and the love that endured even when everything else fell away. Daniel and Grace became a regular presence in my home. Grace was everything Olivia was not, warm, genuine, and unafraid to laugh at herself. She brought homemade bread and stories from her childhood, filling the house with a kind of joy I hadn't known in years. Daniel seemed lighter, more at ease, as if he'd finally shed the weight of trying to fit into someone else's world. I watched them together, their hands intertwined, and felt hope bloom in my heart. One Sunday afternoon, as we sat around the kitchen table sharing tea and laughter, Daniel looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen in a long time. Mom, I want you to know something. I'm proud of you. I know what happened at the wedding hurt you, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, but you handled everything with so much grace. You taught me what it means to stand up for yourself, even when it's hard. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Thank you, Daniel. I did what I had to do. For you and for myself, Grace smiled, her eyes shining. You're an inspiration, Margaret. I hope I can be as strong as you someday. I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me. Strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one day at a time. As the weeks passed, I found myself letting go of old hurts. I no longer replayed Olivia's words in my mind, no longer felt the sting of being called a fat pig, or the shame of being dismissed by people who measured worth in dollars and appearances. Instead, I focused on the life I was building, a life filled with love, honesty, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had never compromised my values. One evening, as I was closing up the library after a long day of volunteering, I saw Richard Whitmore standing by the door. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, but there was a humility in his posture that hadn't been there before. "Margaret," he said, his voice soft, "I wanted to see you one last time before I leave town. We're selling the estate. It's time for a fresh start." I nodded, understanding more than he could know. "I wish you and your family peace, Richard. I hope you find what you're looking for." He hesitated, then offered a small smile. "Thank you for everything." As he walked away, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter with the Whitmores was over, and I was free to write the next part of my story on my own terms. That Christmas, Daniel and Grace joined me for a simple dinner. We exchanged small gifts, sang carols off-key, and shared stories late into the night. There was no pretense, no need to impress anyone, just love, laughter, and the comfort of belonging. Before bed, I stood by the window, watching the snow fall softly outside. I thought about the journey I'd taken, the humiliation, the secrets, the courage it took to face the truth. I realized that, in the end, the greatest wealth I possessed was not money or status, but the ability to forgive, to love, and to begin again. If you're listening to my story, maybe you felt invisible or unworthy too. Maybe you've been made to feel small by people who never bothered to know your heart. I hope you remember this. Your worth is not defined by anyone else's opinion. You are enough just as you are. And sometimes, the most elegant revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and refusing to let anyone else write your story. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you've ever faced a moment like mine, I hope you find the strength to stand tall, to forgive, and to move forward with your head held high. Because in the end, dignity is the one thing no one can take from you.